Spiritualism and Women's Rights in 19th Century America by Braude. Never mind that. You can see the page has broken. See what we can find to put on there. The bell doesn't suffice anymore. What else? We'll put this here. Maybe I'll just put the computer right on it. It's probably the best remedy for it. Besides breaking the spine. Okay, we'll do this. Set this up. Control V. Control V. Come on. Radical spirits. Done. And then add a picture. Radical. Chapter 6, Mediums versus Medical Men. And when I first saw the title, I was like, what is this about? But then I remembered that spirit mediums were subjected to almost bodily searches by people who claimed that they were faking, which of course they were. And I mean by people like table rappers, obviously. You can get away with other things, like basically making up a whole story. Anyway, mediums versus medical men. When spiritualists attempted to discover the meaning of equal rights by stringent application of the principle of individual sovereignty, they did not limit themselves to social or political concerns. They found additional roadblocks to women's autonomy in the physical conditions of their lives. They proposed to free women from cumbersome clothing that restrained their limbs and organs, from medical theories that encouraged them to view themselves as weak, and from barriers to their participation in the healing profession. Spiritualists joined reformers who focused on health and extending self-sovereignty to include what one ate, what one wore, and what sort of treatment one received when ill. All these, they contended, must follow the laws of nature rather than the dictates of society. The female body became one locus of the cultural debate about the role of capabilities of women. Most observers agreed that the health of American women was poor and getting worse. Catherine Beecher's 1855 survey of her acquaintances revealed the terrible decay of female health all over the land. Opponents of women's rights argued that women's generative organs inclined them toward disease and debility, making it impossible for women to enter society on an equal footing with men. Emancipation, in their view, was impossible because restrictions on woman's role resulted directly from her physiology, especially from her reproductive systems. Pardon. In contrast, spiritualists joined health reformers in arguing that women were naturally healthy, but that ill health resulted from the artificial restrictions imposed by civilization on women's natural physical abilities. They found the source of women's debility in social conventions that dictated loveless marriages and repeated unwanted pregnancies, as well as restrictive clothing, an unhealthful diet, and lack of exercise. The emancipation of women for spiritualists was a health issue, providing the only remedy for physical suffering. These two opposing views of women's bodies reflected two different approaches to health in general. Medical practice in 19th century America. Hi, Brian. included an array of techniques whose practitioners fell into two broad categories: regular or orthodox physicians, who based their treatments on the study of anatomy and on physical examinations, and irregular or sectarian physicians who based their practice on a particular system of medicine, ranging from homeopathy to botanical cures and patent medicines. The ineffectiveness of regular therapeutics, coupled with a general distrust of experts with elite education, convinced state legislatures to repeal most laws favoring Orthodox practitioners during the Jacksonian period. As a result, all practitioners enjoyed the same lack of state regulation during the period before the Civil War, but by the century's close, the regulars had secured a monopoly on medical therapeutics from the state, and the practice of competing systems of healing became illegal. In campaigning for their medical monopoly, regulars aimed one attack of their battle against sectarians at the presence of women as healers throughout the sectarian movements. The two poles of opinions about women's bodies had their roots in divergent views of nature that tied sectarian healing to heterodox religion and regular medicine to Protestant orthodoxy, while sectarians looked to nature as an ally in the healing process. Regulars viewed nature as presenting problems that must be cured or controlled. Orthodox religion and orthodox medicine reinforced a similar worldview in which human beings in their natural state were seen as flawed from birth and in need of assistance from officially sanctioned authority figures trained in a specialized body of knowledge. While Orthodox clergy portrayed the human soul as inevitably prone to sin, Orthodox physicians portrayed the human body, especially the female body, as inherently prone to disease. Just as ministers traditionally found a tendency towards sin in woman's moral anatomy because of Eve's instrumental role in tempting Adam into disobedience in the Garden of Eden, so doctors associated woman's physical anatomy with a tendency toward pathology. The emerging male medical establishment alleged that a disease-prone reproductive system governed woman's physiology, resulting in inevitable physical frailty. That dictated a severely restricted sphere of actions. Regular doctors joined the clergy in asserting the appropriateness of women remaining within their sphere, the clergy basing their arguments on the Bible, the doctors basing theirs on the body. Doctors and ministers agreed that both physical and spiritual ill health in women resulted from disobedience. Hello, bruv. They prescribed obedience to a male authority figure as a cure for the degenerative tendencies of body and soul. While all sectarian medical movements attacked the practices of regular doctors, spiritualists incorporated heterodox healing into an integrated worldview that added a critique of the medical establishment to their critiques of the establishment in religion, politics, and society. Spiritualists opposed orthodox medicine with the same fervor with which they opposed orthodox theology, and with some of the same arguments, because they viewed each individual as embodying the image of God and the laws of nature. They viewed health, like godliness, as the natural condition of human beings, which only misguided human intervention could destroy. Disease, according to Andrew Jackson Davis, reflected discord. A cure would result from the restoration of harmony of the individual with the laws of nature. Because harmony was a spiritual as well as a physical quality, it could be restored more effectively by the harmonial philosophy than by physical therapeutics. Atheism is not more destitute of the divine qualities of infinite wisdom or intuitive wisdom that than are the various systems of medicine of the restorative principle, which alone can summit the spirit of health. Davis explained, that was supposed to be part of the last sentence. Because he located the source of disease and spiritual disharmony, he attributed most diseases to mental origins. However, because mental disharmony resulted in real physical disease, he encouraged the use of trained, albeit irregular, physicians. Just as they insisted that individuals had direct access to religious truth without intervention by scripture, clergy, or sacrament, spiritualists also insisted that individuals had direct access to health without the heroic interventions of regular physicians. Spiritualists equated laws designed to give regulars a monopoly of medical practice with laws regarding the establishment of religion. Thomas Hazard of Rhode Island compared the legislative campaign of the old bloodletting, opium, and drugging school with the contemporaneous campaign to amend the Constitution to declare the United States a Christian nation, the combined results of which would consign as merchandise the souls of men to one branch of the conspirators and their bodies by mutual compact to the other. Hazard devoted the first 30 pages of his family medical instructor to descriptions of the pain and suffering caused by bloodletting and narcotics administered by regulars, in contrast to the benign techniques of unlettered practitioners. What the fuck is this, Brandon? He cautioned spiritualists to beware of conspiracies of doctors and ministers to incarcerate innocent healing mediums in insane asylums, not an unwarranted concern given that regulars defined mediumship as a disease. In addition to insisting that women were naturally healthy, spiritualists also asserted that women were better suited than men to act as healers. They believed that spirit communication through women's mediumship could cure the diseases of the physical body, just as it healed rents in the social fabric and cured rifts between the living and the dead. In medicine, as in religion, spiritualists took the opposite extreme from the orthodox position, turning for healing not to men with training, but to women with vision. Medical mediums. The desire for relief from physical suffering joined the desire for relief from the emotional anguish of bereavements and drawing investigators to spiritualism. As the technological advances of the 19th century increased expectations about the ability of human beings to harness natural forces and control the physical world, the therapeutic capabilities of physicians made little progress. In part, to fulfill their patients' desires for therapy that would produce immediate observable results, Orthodox physicians relied on heroic bleedings and purgings as well as narcotics and alcohol. Although bloodletting was on the decline by mid-century, physicians continued to prescribe opium and alcohol and to subject even infants and children to toxic doses of mercury until well after the Civil War. The greatest challenge to regular doctors and their heroic treatments came from homeopathists, whose sweet-tasting medicines and infinitesimal doses provided a pleasant alternative to the regimen of poisons prescribed by regulars. For those whose diseases proved no more susceptible to the sugar pills of the homeopathist than to the dangerous prescriptions of the regulars, physically benign religious or mental healing offered a rational alternative for victims of disease like Oxa Sprague, who had exhausted the ineffective physical therapies available in 19th century America. Only the hope of a cure by spirits remained. Medical mediums and clairvoyant physicians, most of them women, appeared throughout the country, offering an attractive choice of treatment for consumers of medical care. Some examined patients in trance, dispensing remedies prescribed by spirit doctors. Others healed through the laying on of hands charged with spirit forces, while still others used the clairvoyant state to see inside the diseased body. Spiritualism adopted from mesmerism the notion that entranced individuals could heal disease. But while mesmerism attributed the healing agency enabled by trance to a universal mesmeric fluid, spiritualists transformed the healing trance into a form of mediumship. Mediums offered a wide variety of medical services. The clairvoyant physician, Mrs. J.C. Dutton, maintained 2 offices in Cleveland, one on the east side and one on the west. She described her healing technique. While in clairvoyant state, examines patients, discovers the nature of their disease, prescribes proper homeopathic, botanical, and electromagnetic remedies. In addition to office visits, she offered to send her own medical formula, which promised to cure fever or ague in 1 week. Another Cleveland practitioner offered to treat disease through clairvoyance and through the laying on of hands. A Boston midwife and ladies' physician announced in the Banner that she had engaged a trance medium to assist in her practice. She also announced that she accepted indigent cases in the advertising columns of spiritualist newspapers. Healing mediums offered consultations through the mail to those who enclosed $1 and a lock of their hair. While trance speakers relied on the free listing of lecturers in spiritualist periodicals to apprise the public of their whereabouts, healing mediums paid for advertisements and listed themselves in city directories. Americans in need of medical treatment flocked to take advantage of the therapeutic alternatives offered by spiritualists. Dr. Maine's Institute for Healing, under the guidance of spirits, announced that it treated 98 inpatients as well as handling 7,000 office visits during its first year of operation in 1857. Dr. Maine proudly announced a net profit of $2,000. The author of The Plain Guide to Spiritualism advised the formation of healing circles in every community because he said there were not enough healing mediums to go around. The Midwestern activist Elmer Loudon wrote to the Banner in hopes of convincing some healing mediums to move from Boston to Illinois. Noted trance speaker Cora Hatch and Melvina Townsend began as healing mediums. Mediums did practice medicines, but they avoided the purgatives, stimulants, and narcotics used by regular doctors. When Isaac Post was unwell, a clairvoyant who was an old family friend wrote that she had felt inclined to look after him and his prospects and discovered a considerable debility, the result of bilious derangement. In her clairvoyant state, she thought he needed some bitters prepared as follows: orange peel, chamomile, etc., and gin. Mrs. Samantha Mettler patented and distributed nationally medicines bearing her name and made according to recipes revealed to her by spirits. Oh my God. Her medicines and her practice with her husband as psychomagnetic physicians allowed Mettler to support her family and accumulate substantial real estate. Mettler's patent medicine success preceded that of the famous Lydia Pinkham by 20 years. Lydia Pinkham did not attribute her recipe to spirits, but her faith in the superiority of her own vegetable compound to the prescriptions of the regulars derived from the progressive Quaker heritage that led her into abolition and spiritualism. Sarah Danskin called herself a physician of the new school because she had been the pupil and medium of the spirit of Benjamin Rush for 10 years. She also offered for sale the American Lung Healer, prepared and magnetized by Mrs. Danskin. Danskin, I tell you. Spiritualist practitioners emphasized the difference between their techniques and those of orthodox physicians. One ad in the Banner of Light offered the services of a husband and wife medical team who felt no sympathy with the legalized medical institution and offered to treat patients instead with the store of eclectic, botanic, Thompsonian, and patent medicines. Who the hell's Thompson? Mary Robbins Post wrote to Amy and Isaac of a medium who extolled the virtues of her remedy and contrasted her cure with others who had been treated by the first-rate doctors who almost invariably give calomel. Post expressed satisfaction that the medium dwelt on the pernicious effects of calomel, a purgative that caused mercury poisoning, but feared that a sick relative's faith in doctor's prescriptions will remain though he order calomel every night for a week. Another correspondent of Amy Post's described how the prescription of a male doctor, tincture of opium and snuff, dried my throat out so I could not swallow. She then went to a medium whose treatment was mainly magnetic and felt much better in every way. Spiritualist healers proudly described the medicines they administered as mild in comparison to the strong drugs used by regulars. I don't know. While regular doctors relied on prescriptions as the basis of therapy, spiritualists placed their faith in the laws of nature as the most potent therapeutic agent. Medicines cannot impart the principle of health any more than a book can convey the light of wisdom, explained Andrew Jackson Davis. He warned sufferers that there were no infallible remedies and urged them to place their confidence in the self-healing energies that impregnate every fiber of the organism. Animosity between healing mediums and regular physicians pervades the biography of Mrs. J.H. Conant, medium of the Banner of Light Free Circle for 17 years. Her biographer describes the near death of the medium from an overdose of morphine prescribed by a physician who wrote the incorrect dose because he was himself under the influence of stimulants. The overdose was administered to the unconscious woman by her husband, who had faith in the doctor who prescribed it. When apprised of the result of his prescription, the physician acknowledged his mistake and gave his patient up for dead. But Mrs. Conant prescribed for herself in trance, and as soon as she received the medicine of a simple nature that she requested, she speedily recovered. Mrs. Conant continued to sit for medical examinations only. Each afternoon, after her services as a test medium, were engaged exclusively by the Banner. Medical mediums, like mediums in general, were predominantly female. Spiritualists viewed women as specially suited to the healing profession. Just as they found a warrant for women's religious leadership and accepted stereotypes about women's natural piety, they found a justification for the medical training of women in the common view that women had inherent nurturing qualities. In an address entitled Woman the Physician, Mary Nichols argued that woman was suited to healing because she was loving, whereas man has had the strength to be a surgeon, poisoner, destroyer, hangman. Who shall do this work better than woman? Woman, who had suffered most at the hands of materia medica, editorialized the Spiritualist New Era on Miranda Randall's receipt of the MD in 1855. Randall viewed women as especially suited to medical practice because of their personal experience with the health consequences of a social system that forced women into marriages in which they could not control access to their own bodies. Every medical man knows, if he does not, every medical woman does, that the penalty of God's laws, which those human laws compel us to violate, directly kill 99 hundredths of the female world. In Randall's view, women needed sound medical care more than men did because they suffered more harshly from the ills of society. Spiritualists viewed the training of women as medical professionals as a step in progress toward living by the laws of nature. Their hostility toward regular physicians and support for female practitioners made them supportive of any women who entered the medical field. Whether orthodox or sectarian, notwithstanding the opposition of conservative scientists, we can see no limit to the power of woman to enter the chambers of knowledge. Every institution should be open to her, wrote the spiritualist eclectic Dr. Elcinda Wilhelm. A number of spiritualists were associated with the beginnings of the Women's Medical College of Philadelphia, the first women's medical school founded in 1850. The Longshores, a Philadelphia Quaker family, played a prominent role both in founding the college and in the rise of spiritualism in Philadelphia. The original impetus for the founding of the college was said to have resulted from the interest in medicine shown by the first president's sister-in-law, Hannah Myers Longshore. A member of the Women's Medical College's first graduating class, became its first female faculty member in 1853. The same year, she sat weekly in one of Philadelphia's first seance circles. She was joined at the weekly seances by her husband, the vice president of the college's board of trustees, by her sister-in-law, Anna Longshore, another early graduate who would go on to become a world-renowned women's health lecturer, and by one of her medical students, Rebecca B. Thomas. As the Women's Medical College of Philadelphia struggled to increase its acceptance by the medical establishment and expelled its unorthodox members, including its founders, the Longshores went on to start another medical school, this time explicitly irregular. The Penn Medical University identified its approach as eclectic, indicating that it taught its students to utilize a variety of therapeutic approaches. The interests of the new school students and faculty are indicated by the subjects of these accepted for graduation. In addition to more conventional medical subjects, several theses address woman's role as a physician. Several focus on electricity as a therapeutic agent, and one discusses mind and matter. Spiritualists transferred their loyalty to the new school. At least 7 active spiritualists graduated from the Penn Medical University during its early years. Miranda Randall, Elcinda Wilhelm, Rebecca B. Thomas, Caroline Hinckley Spear, Annie Stambach, Samuel B. Britton, and Horace Dresser. All but Rebecca Thomas became well-known speakers on the spiritualist platform. Just as trance speakers swelled the ranks of America's first group of women on the public platform, so medical mediums were well represented among the first women to receive formal medical training. Miranda Randall, Oxa Sprague's sister-in-law, had practiced botanic obstetrics in Woodstock, Vermont for 15 years. Following the advent of her mediumship, she decided to travel to Philadelphia to attend the Penn Medical University. After receiving the MD, she set up a practice in Philadelphia in which she offered patients eclectic medical treatment in addition to healing by magnetic or spiritual influence by touch. Caroline Hinckley Spear also traveled to Philadelphia for medical education. In 1859, she had accompanied the medium John Murray Spear to his community at Spirit Springs in upstate New York as his amanuensis, there we go, and had born his illegitimate child, Jesus Christ. In 1863, Spear divorced his wife and married Carolyn Hinckley. A few years later, she graduated from the Penn Medical University and was appointed to its faculty. By 1870, she and her husband had moved to California, where she joined in organizing the first woman suffrage organization. Spiritualists joined the general health reform movement in arguing that disease could be prevented by living according to the laws of nature. Spiritualists like Henry C. Wright, Mary Gove Nichols, Mary Tillotson, and Paulina Wright Davis played a role in health reform beyond spiritualist circles. Spiritualists acknowledge the kinship between their health reform goals and those of others who challenge the medical establishment. During the Civil War, Louisa Patterson, secretary of the Progressive Spiritualists of Cadiz, Indiana, offered a resolution to provide Union soldiers with an alternative to allopathic medical care. The convention drafted a statement asking President Lincoln to allow soldiers to return home to be nursed by wives and mothers rather than remaining in dangerous Army hospitals under the care of regular physicians. Even the first women regulars found themselves allied with heterodox practitioners against the male medical establishment, which tried to maintain a monopoly to the exclusion of both groups. Dr. Marie Zakarzuska, pioneer regular physician, was refused office space because the landlord assumed that a female practitioner must be a medium. Female regulars sympathized with reformers' oppositions to the repressive orthodox view of women's physiology, and spiritualists returned the compliment. "We like to see these female doctors," said a speaker at the annual festival of the Religio-Philosophical Society. "They prove the powers of woman to be equal to man." Health reform. Although spiritualism's critique of orthodox medicine offered hope to patients of both sexes, spiritualists focused their attention on overcoming barriers to women's health. They espoused a variety of reforms aimed at freeing women from socially constructed restrictions on their physical motion and development, including dress reform, gymnastics, temperance, vegetarianism, and water cure. Health reform appealed to women's rights advocates because it contradicted the association of femininity with physical frailty and ill health. In order that the spirit may grow and develop properly, argued Dr. Juliet Stillman, it is necessary that the body should be kept in a healthy condition. She maintained that dress and health reform were necessary both to the advancement of women and to the advancement of spiritualism. While mediums freed individuals from pain and disease, spiritualist reformers proposed specific, easy for you to say, specific reformations of personal life that they believe would free the population generally from illness and suffering. Spiritualists appealed to the laws of life as written in the Book of Nature as guides to maintaining health as well as curing disease. Americans read spiritualist medical advice in Mrs. Lucina Tuttle's The Clairvoyant Family Physician and in The Harbinger of Health by Andrew Jackson Davis. Here they received advice on preventive medicine consistent with modern recommendations for the avoidance of America's worst health hazards, cancer, heart disease, and alcoholism. Spiritualist health reformers following an earlier generation of dietary reformers led by Sylvester Graham advised vegetarianism as well as abstinence from tea, coffee, tobacco, and alcohol. They decried the use of narcotics and advised regular exercise and fresh air. Andrew Jackson Davis's Progressive Annual listed not only spiritualist lecturers but also practicing women physicians, women instructors in light gymnastics, practical dress reformers who wore the American costume, composed like the bloomer of a short skirt over loose trousers, and speakers on the freedom and equality of the sexes. How many pages have we got to go before the end? 261. All right, 9 more pages. Demonstrating spiritualist faith in women's physical strength, Mary Davis's daughter provided instructions in light gymnastics. Following D.O. Lewis at the spiritualist Belvedere Seminary run by the popular poet Belle Bush, Davis defended women's participation in gymnastics as an aid to health and fitness. The Banner of Light printed a lively series of articles in which dress reformers advocated riding astride as a healthful and appropriate activity for women and discussed what women should wear when they did it. Dress reform will eradicate the worst slavery of American women, claimed Andrew Jackson Davis's Herald of Progress. Dress reform applied only to women, no attempt being made to alter the standard male costume. Spiritualist lecturer Louise T. Whittier refused invitations to speak on spiritualism in order to give priority to dress reform. She apologized to the readers of the Banner of Light for refusing their many requests, but insisted that physical reform must accompany spiritual emancipation. As a plank of the spiritualist women's rights platform, dress reform represented larger concerns than mere physical freedom. Dress reformers viewed women's fashion. All right, my camera's messing up. Dress reformers viewed women's fashion as morally debasing because they distorted the female form in order to appeal to male sensuality. Spiritualists hoped that dress reform, like marriage reform, would alleviate the devastating health effects of male lust. Good luck. Trans speaker Miss A.S. Knox condemned the false education of girls because it lied to women's present condition of slavery to fashion. Confining clothes kept women in their place and restricted women's movement so as to render them incapable of venturing outside their sphere. Replacing traditional attire with reform dress indicated independence of spirit, as well as a desire for physical freedom. The editors of the Vanguard thought that an applicant's decision to wear bloomers showed evidence of sufficient intellectual capacity to exceed the usual feminine role and succeed as a typesetter on their paper. Displaying one's radicalism so visibly required courage. Spiritualist William Denton recalled that when he met his future wife, Elizabeth Foote, in the mid-1850s, he had considerable trouble shielding her from insult because she wore the bloomer. Foote, who worked as a compositor on the Type of the Times, a paper advocating phonetic spelling, one of the less urgent items on the spiritualist reform agenda, expressed her progressive lifestyle in her dress. Only a minority of mediums and lecturers actually donned the American costume. Most trans speakers preferred traditional feminine garb, more appealing to the public. Spiritualists and other reformers agreed in principle that women should be freed from the bonds of fashion, but the practitioners of dress reform found a more receptive audience among spiritualists. The rejection of the reform dress was the first concession to the expediency on the part of the non-movement. Stanton and Anthony wore the bloomer briefly, but soon gave up the new costume because it attracted ridicule, not because they no longer believed in the principles that caused them to adopt it. As always, the small cadre of spiritualist dress reformers put principles before pragmatism. They continued to wear and to advocate the reform dress long after most reformers abandoned it. At one spiritualist convention, the husband of a popular medium heard it remarked that if diet and dress reform were discussed here, it would hurt the cause. But he concluded if the cause were hurt so easily, let it die. The Banner of Light and spiritualist conventions provided forums for discussion of dress reform. Between the demise of the National Dress Reform Association in 1863 and the founding of the American Free Dress League by spiritualist Mary Tillotson in 1875, spiritualists universally condemned the baleful influence of tobacco and alcohol. Although they objected to the intolerance and sectarianism of the evangelical temperance movement, they unanimously supported its goal. Trans speaker Warren Chase participated in the temperance movement in the early 1850s, but abandoned it because of its religiously bigoted spirit. He regretted the adoption of the movement by the Protestant churches because whatever reform the clergy took hold of was poisoned to death, for their kid gloves soon crowded off the hardened hands of labor without which there could be no success. The quarterly conference of the Northwestern Association of Spiritualists resolved that as our spiritual growth depends to a great extent upon the physical, that we should strive by living in accordance with natural laws to promote healthy conditions, and that the use of All stimulating drinks and tobacco should be discontinued by all lovers of purity and progress. Like other temperance advocates, they decried the victimization of wives and daughters legally subject to drunken husbands and fathers. Even vegetarianism could be seen as a women's issue. That what a clunky wording of this. Why are they? I don't get why they substitute woman for women's and women's for woman's. Seen as a women's issue by health reformers who depicted meat eating as a form of male violence. All kinds of brutes are eaten by man, Juliet Stillman told the Spiritualist Convention. Even little singing birds do not escape his rapacity. In Water Cure, spiritualists found a medical system in sympathy with the reform orientation, also called hydropathy. Hydropathy. Water cure was a therapeutic approach imported from Europe in 1843 that relied on the internal consumption and external application of cold water for the prevention and cure of all diseases. Spiritualists, as well as others antebellum reformers, embraced water cure because of its appeal to the laws of nature embodied in each human being as the source of healing, and because of the reform principles of its leaders. Hydropathy relied on the natural curative tendencies of the individual rather than on intervention by an authoritative medical expert. The editor of the Spiritualist Vanguard commended that the Cottage Grove water cure, where proprietors Dr. Routh and wife were radical reformers and spiritualists. Water cure establishments provided a fertile environment for the development of many of the ideas advocated by spiritualist health reformers. At water cures, reform dress, diet, and ideas were the norm rather than the exception. Hydropathic retreats held special sympathy for unorthodox approaches to childbirth. Regular physicians and reformers agreed that the sedentary habits of middle-class women led to ill health and made pregnancy and childbirth more difficult. Orthodox doctors treated the resulting symptoms with heroic bleedings, purgings, and dosings, while hydropathists treated the cause with healthful living in order to make intervention unnecessary. The hydropathic regimen of fresh air, exercise, loose clothing, and cold water safeguarded the health of mother and child from intervention by obstetrically ignorant Orthodox doctors who bled hemorrhaging women from the arm and dosed parturient mothers with toxic preparations. Andrew Jackson Davis claimed that the majority of married women suffered from the results of malpractice during confinement. He blamed their misfortunes on the practice of employing male doctors. Beautiful souls, wrote Davis, always shrink from the wretched practice of doctoring a child into existence. While regular doctors waged war against the employment of female midwives, Davis agreed with many sectarians that female birth attendants were necessary to preserve the health of mother and child. He viewed the employment of regular physicians as harmful, both because of their gender and because their Calvinistic perspective portrayed pain in childbirth as inevitable. Our Orthodox brethren teach that women's physiological sufferings are unavoidable, that women's menstruational and childbearing pains are the results of an original sin. Davis explained, he told his readers, read the book of nature with a different light. Regulars insisted on weeks or months of bed rest following childbirth, leaving previously healthy women severely depleted. The refusal to give up their bodies to the heroic treatments and months of confinement prescribed by regular doctors was one more way in which spiritualist women insisted on individual sovereignty. Water cures contradicted convention by encouraging women to focus on their own needs rather than the needs of others. Often located in picturesque pastoral settings, water cure establishments freed women from domestic cares and from the watchful eye of tyrant custom. Such conditions proved ideal for the discovery of talents incompatible with domestic duties, such as mediumship. A quarterly convention of speakers and mediums met at the Avon Spring Water Cure in New York State in 1869, where the proprietor made arrangements for participants to board at the cost of $1 per day. The assembled mediums recommended the Avon Cure as providing favorable surroundings and conditions for the unfoldment of all phases of mediumship. Miss Marietta Munson was sent to a water cure to be treated for lung fever in 1854. There she met a medium who said she would recover and become a medium herself. They remained at the cure together for 6 months. Spirits informed Munson that she had been cured on condition that she become a public medium. When she returned home and forgot the terms under which she had been cured, she was reminded by an attack of typhoid fever. She then joined in practice with a healing medium. The medium, Mrs. Bushnell, made a living by exercising her clairvoyant powers at a water cure. One of spiritualism's most avid advocates of both health reform and women's rights was the hydropathic doctor Juliet Stillman Severance. In 1857, she enrolled in the Hygiotherapeutic College in New York City, run by R.T. Troll, who introduced hydropathy in America. A Baptist in good standing when she began medical school, Stillman soon attended her first seance and received convincing evidence of spirit communication. The spirits quickly empowered her to espouse controversial positions. In the College Debate Society, she and one other argued a position opposed by the whole society. When I rose to speak, I was positively controlled, Stillman recalled, and to show the power that was used through me, I will state that, notwithstanding the professors and students were all opposed to my argument, I received the vote of the House. On her graduation, Julia Stillman embarked on a career of constant controversy as a hydropathic and magnetic physician and accoucheur, spiritualist lecturer, and women's right and health reform radical. She adopted the reform dress in 1852 and wore it throughout the 1850s and 60s while practicing medicine in Wisconsin and Iowa and lecturing throughout the Midwest. When she first practiced in DeWitt, Iowa, the local regular doctors launched a campaign against her. In 1865, she created a stir at a Minneapolis medical convention where, as chair of the Committee on Resolutions, she introduced the clause favoring magnetism as a therapeutic agent. Stillman bore 3 children by her first husband. There is no record of whether the first marriage and family occurred before or after her graduation from medical school at the age of 25 and the beginning of her lengthy public career as doctor and lecturer. In 1869, she married her spiritualist co-worker, A.B. Severance, without interrupting her tireless service as organizer and speaker at spiritualist conventions. The Religio-Philosophical Journal noted that her marriage was accompanied by a shift from bloomers and boots to short dresses and shoes, implying that she still shunned conventional clothing. Even among her co-religionists, her consistent reform views generated contention. Called the radical of the radicals by a contemporary source, Juliet Stillman Severance championed Victoria Woodhull in 1872 as an agent of social freedom and continued to advocate radical sexual ideas long after Woodhull had abandoned them. An occasional investigator objected to the amount of time devoted to women's rights and health reform at spiritualist conventions. After one of Juliet Stillman Severance's more graphic health reform lectures, a Mr. Kellogg protested that they ought to be discussing spirits, not social issues. I suppose the majority came here to hear about the spiritualism, not about bloomerism. Sweetbreads and potatoes, he complained. Apparently, Mr. Kellogg was incorrect, for he was then treated to a trance lecture by Miss Knox, who spoke at length of the laws of life, birth, and death, and the necessity of woman being elevated to a position equal with man. Next, the convention heard a letter from Mrs. Daniel, editor of the Rising Tide, in which she expressed her hope that the conference would discuss women's rights and marriage and every social wrong, probing to the very center at whatever cost it may be to the sensitive feelings of those present. Spiritualists' advocacy of health reform may seem inconsistent with Andrew Jackson Davis's claim that all disease originated in the mind. If disease was mental in origin and could be cured by adopting a harmonious mental outlook, why should one be concerned with the physical conditions of life? The spiritualist vision of a harmonious natural order depicted the union of mind and body. Because spiritualists believed that spirits had bodies and that those bodies were perfected versions of the bodies we have while living, they gave the body greater ultimate importance than religious outlooks that viewed physical life as fleeting and unimportant. But placing such importance on the body presented other problems for a religion that maintained that spirits could pass through walls and mysteriously transport themselves from one sphere of the universe to another. As the century wore on, these hazier regions of spiritualist cosmology would draw criticism from other metaphysical movements. Spiritualist involvement in health reform may be difficult to explain from the point of view of their beliefs about the nature of the body, but it is easy to explain in terms of their commitment to women's rights, their anti-authoritarianism, and their anti-Calvinism. Spiritualists hope that health reform, like spirit communication, would allow people to live as reflections of a benign and harmonious natural world in which sin, evil, and disease had no place. Spiritualism and allied causes of nervous derangement. Spiritualism's attack on orthodox medicine and the worldview of which it was a part did not go unanswered. Regularly trained physicians fighting to bar a host of sectarian medical systems from practice took spiritualism seriously, both as a source of competition and as a manifestation of disease. Male doctors attacked women in general during this period as unfit to practice medicine or any other profession because of an anatomical proclivity to hysteria. The medical attack on mediums was a special case, and an especially vehement one, of the medical attack on women in general. Doctors who viewed the female organization as inherently pathological saw mediums, who exemplified so many feminine qualities, as prime examples of pathology. Not coincidentally, mediums also constituted a highly visible and vocal case of the assertion of the rights and the wisdom of women practicing healing and using heterodox methods in their practice. Mrs. A.T. Harris wrote to the Banner of Light that when she returned to Northfield, Vermont in 1859 after a 2-year absence, healing mediums had replaced regular physicians. Previously, attempts were made to banish them from town. Now, among 6 allopathics are 1 reformer and 5 healing mediums. Whether spiritualists actually threatened the dominance of regular doctors is unclear, but they voiced competitive ambitions. The well-known neurologist William Alexander Hammond, a professor at New York City's University and at Belleville Hospital, addressed the pathology of mediumship in the North American Review in 1870. He revised this article into a monograph. The physics and Physiology of Spiritualism, in which he denied the reality of spiritualist phenomena, attributing its appearance to suggestion and sleight of hand. He explained the behavior of mediums as symptoms of hypnosis, hysteria, catalepsy, and ecstasy. Hammond gave examples from ancient history to which men manifested these conditions, but all the cases he presented from his own practice described female patients and strongly associated mediumship with hysteria, believed by doctors of the period to be a disease of the female reproductive organs, womb disease. Thus, he believed in the abstract that men could suffer from mediumship. But in his own practice, he could identify the disease only in females. In 1876, Hammond took the opportunity presented by the demand for a new edition of the Physics and Physiology of Spiritualism to enlarge it into Spiritualism and the Allied Causes of Nervous Derangement, a work of 366 pages, including chapters devoted to each phase of mediumship. I got to get this book. Speaking, healing, physical, etc., and a chapter on fasting girls, who attributed their ability to survive without food to spirit agency. The book upheld the same arguments advanced in the earlier volume, but showed Hammond's continued interest in the subject. The new edition showed familiarity with a wide range of mediumistic behavior, apparently gathered from personal observation, but investigation did not alter Hammond's views. At most of the spiritualistic meetings which I have attended, he wrote, there have been hysterical phenomena manifested. And he wasn't wrong. William B. Carpenter, Register of the University of London, devoted the chapter to spiritualism and mesmerism in his popular Principles of Mental Physiology in 1874. In 1876, Alfred Russel Wallace's Defense of Spiritualism from the chair of the anthropological section of the British Association made it an issue in the transatlantic scientific community. In the wake of the well-publicized fraud trial of medium Henry Slade in London and increased concern about spiritualism among scientists, Carpenter treated the subject further in Mesmerism, Spiritualism, and etc. I guess that's just etc. Historically and scientifically considered. Carpenter attended seances with Alfred Russel Wallace, but did not share Wallace's enthusiasm for what he saw. Like Hammond, he attributed public demonstrations to fraud. Agreed. In place of hysteria, Carpenter found the motivation for fraud in the fostering influence of pecuniary temptations. In paid mediums and in malice in unpaid mediums. For it is well known to those who have adequate opportunities of observation, he wrote, that there is a class of persons, especially, I'm sorry to have to say, of the female sex, who have an extraordinary proclivity to deceit, and who enjoy nothing better than taking in older and wiser people. Although Carpenter's claim that spiritualism resulted from women's deceptiveness provided a less complex explanation than Hammond's for mediumistic behavior, he joined in associating it closely with femininity. Every medical practitioner has met with cases in which young ladies have imposed in this way by feigning disease, not only upon their families, but upon their previous doctors. R. Frederick Marvin, professor of psychological medicine and medical jurisprudence in the New York Free Medical College for Women, finally named the disease of which spiritualism was the symptom. He identified a form of insanity that he labeled mediomania, or the insanity of mediums. That's fucking brilliant, honestly. He found that mediomania was a very ancient form of derangement. The name is modern, the phenomena ancient. Relying heavily on Hammond, Marvin associated mediumship with the natural pathology of female organs. Because the female reproductive system was more complex than the male, those forms of insanity which are associated with derangements of the system are more frequent among women than among men. Marvin found that mediomania, while it often attacks men, more frequently assails women and is generally preceded by a or venereal pathological history. The word mediomania, he concluded, though not actually synonymous with the word utromania, is very closely allied with it in meaning. Both Hammond and Marvin associated disease of the female reproductive system and so mediumship with women's willful departure from traditional roles. Hammond attributed the appearance of mediumistic hysteria in one case to his patient's excessive mental exertion, she having contracted a taste for philosophy, that is a mental condition, in the study of which she indulged to a great extent. Following the influential work of Dr. Edward H. Clarke, these doctors asserted that if women used their brains to attempt the mental exertion required for higher education, they would overtax their systems and suffer gynecological disease. Marvin, taking this reasoning a step further, claimed that departure from traditional feminine roles was not the cause, but rather the symptom of reproductive disease. He viewed mediumship as a manifestation of a medical disorder causing rebellion against gender roles. Utromania frequently results in mediomania. The angle at which the womb is suspended in the pelvis frequently settles the whole question of sanity or insanity. Tilt the organ a little forward, introvert it, and immediately the patient forsakes her home, embraces some strong altruism, Mormonism, mesmerism, Fourierism, socialism, oftener spiritualism. She becomes possessed by the idea that she has some startling mission in the world. She forsakes her home, her children, her duty to mount the rostrum and proclaim the peculiar virtues of free love, elective affinity, or the reincarnation of souls. In the angle of the uterus, Marvin discovered the source of sympathy between religious and political radicalism that has eluded so many historians. The Banner of Light responded to his novel theory by hurling back at the doctors all the charges made in the medical war against spiritualism. It found the scientists guilty of the grossest charlatanry and humbug in their toe joint, uteromaniac, and epileptic theories. And true to form, the Banner accused the doctors of being unscientific. The fraudulent medium, if such exists, who ekes out a subsistence by imitating veritable facts in a deceptive way, is less a criminal than the malicious sociologist who denies the facts that others of unquestionable veracity and intelligence have tested and witnessed. Much of what was at stake in the debate between mediums and medical men concerned the appropriateness of women exercising will. Marvin makes it clear that for a woman to believe that she can exercise her will in order to accomplish a mission in the world is a symptom of disease. Many therapeutic innovations in the treatment of diseases of women during this period, like Veer Mitchell's rest cure, involved the subjugation of the will of the female patient to that of her male doctor. Spiritualists envisioned a more egalitarian relationship between patient and practitioner in which the patient was encouraged to exercise the self-healing properties of her own nature. In his discussion of gynecological disease, Andrew Jackson Davis presents the will as the most important element in women's recovery of health. Interestingly, he prescribes the use of the will to cure the very disease that Marvin thought caused mediumship. Prolapsus uteri. The way he states his advice suggests that he knew it contradicted conventional wisdom. The treatment we propose is radical and positive. The paragon of all remedies, the faultless curative power within the pharmacy of immortal mind is the will. Let every sister, whether daughter or mother, diseased or healthy, exercise this immaculate energy. Spiritualists and physicians both associated the physical characteristics leading to mediumship with the female body. Spiritualists, however, viewed these characteristics as fostering revelation, while doctors viewed them as pathology. One spiritualist described 19th-century women as physically inactive, sedentary, and non-manifestational, yet found that the resulting weakness made them good vehicles for spirit communication. Two competing schools of healing voiced competing interpretations of the physical nature of mediumship. The view of mediumship espoused by regular doctors was an extension of their view of female physiology as inherently pathological. In contrast, a columnist in the American Spiritualist explained, "We are not to consider the negative condition a manifestation of disease without susceptibility and impressionableness. Control by spirit power would be impossible." How could spiritualists reconcile this celebration of female weakness and passivity with their assertions that women were naturally strong and healthy? As spiritualists struggled with the cultural vocabulary of Victorian ideas about gender and stretched them to their limits, they bumped up against the contradictions inherent within them. After all, 19th-century norms portrayed women both as paragons of virtue who had the moral power to influence men to resist evil, and simultaneously as weak, will-less hysterics in need of protection both from the world and from the pathological tendencies of their own physiology. Spiritualists made virtues out of both feminine stereotypes, salvaging a moral role for women out of either activity or passivity. And that's the end of that chapter. A long one that basically rotted my brain out of the head, as if it was disembodied. That's all. Chapter 7 awaits. How many pages are left? 62. Basically 40 pages. All right, Bobs. That's all.